that Adam, even though he was in the idyllic, perfect setting in this garden, and he had one thing,
Yeah,
he
he
had
could eat. He could eat almost everything he wanted.
one temptation, yeah, and he couldn't do it. But Jesus is out in the desert wasteland, starving to death,
hmm
and he's facing food temptation, and he triumphs in the worst possible circumstances. Well, it's like we talked about before. You find this freedom, right? In the case of our situation, we find freedom from sin. But now that we're free to do good things, we have to choose to do good things.
Yeah.
We have to provide that every day.
By nature being free,
Yeah.
you could also choose not to do good things.
Right. Welcome to Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. I'm Timothy.
And I'm Caleb.
And you're listening to Bible Discussions, the forum where we explore biblical topics that are relevant to your life. Today we are continuing our series on the life of Christ. And this is the 11th episode in that series, and it's about the temptation of Jesus. But first, let me say that this is Bible Discussions episode number 100.
Yep.
So I think it's kind of unbelievable for us that we've gotten to this point, isn't it, Caleb?
Yeah, I didn't think we'd make it past 10. Technically, we have, because of episode 0 and the 2 interviews, there'd be 103 episodes, right?
Yeah, right now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but in this series, it's 100.
Yeah, we thought about doing something outrageous to publicize this event. And so my first thought was that we would give $1 million to the first person who calls in and donates $1 million. But we decided that was kind of gimmicky. And then even though we have the resources to do something like that, but then we realized also that providing God's word to everybody was something more valuable than money.
Yeah.
I'm sure you all agree. So let's get right into the 100th episode then.
Yeah, this is going to be about the temptation of Jesus, the encounter between Jesus and Satan in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
So still kind of like a highlight 100th episode. It's the heavyweight match of all time.
Yeah, it's not even pay-per-view. So we offer it to you for free. So I want you to listen. Caleb mentioned it's the battle out in the wilderness, and so listen. That's a motif that's really important in the Bible.
The wilderness.
Yeah, the wilderness. And so listen for that in a lot of the passages that we're going to read during this episode from both Testaments. And we're going to start with this passage from Mark, who now is appearing 2 episodes in a row. Go Mark, right?
I think he's the shortest gospel, right? So we're kind of having to sandwich him in there where we can.
Yeah, and maybe the first one written too. So we haven't really talked much about that, but the primacy of Mark is kind of assumed by most people now, I think. But even though he's got a shorter gospel, many of his stories are more detailed than Matthew and Luke's.
This isn't one of them.
But this is not one of them, yeah. So this is going to be Mark 1, verses 12 and 13.
At once the Spirit sent him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and angels attended him.
So
that's it.
Yep. Now, in the Synoptic Gospels, this story immediately follows the baptism of Jesus.
Yeah.
Right.
That's where it says at once. It's like on the heels of it. Like almost he comes out of the water. He's like, all right, I got to go.
Yeah. And all of those stories end the same way as Matthew 3:17, which says, "And a voice from heaven said, 'This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased.'" So we see the pleasure of God in his son, that he's been baptized, that he's fulfilling all the things that he was supposed to do. And the Spirit has just descended on him, as we read last week in John's testimony about it.
And our big takeaway was like Jesus is in the baptismal water. Like the same thing happens to us that happens to him. So like when we come out of the water, God has the same opinion of us. This is my son whom I love and with whom I'm well pleased.
But oddly, as you continue reading, after his baptism, he's led by the Holy Spirit straight to this temptation in the wilderness, right?
Yeah. And
This encounter with malevolence and evil.
I petitioned to get the first part of baptism without this part, but it seems to be pretty much universal.
Yeah.
It's almost like the devil doesn't like it when you get baptized and he targets you.
Did you have Job's friends sign on to your petition with you?
I couldn't find them because they're all dead. But
yeah, a lot of times when we think, "All right, well, I have a better idea than than you, God," but yeah. So anyway, there's irony in it though, and even though he's immediately has this great big triumph, he's sent straight out into face his hardest temptation. But Caleb, you found some encouragement in it too.
Yeah, because there's a parallel forward in time, right? Like, so, I mean, we've talked about it briefly before when we started the podcast, or when we tried to start the podcast. All this stuff started happening. A tornado hit your house.
Mm-hmm.
You started having bizarre eye problems, and it was like it put back our actual start of the podcast by months.
Yeah,
and it's like as soon as you start trying to do something for God, like there's this opposition to it. So that seems discouraging, but Christ has gone through that already. Like he's not only with us in the waters of baptism, he's with us in the temptation and the challenges, adversity that follows.
Yeah, you have to be able to look forward to the 100th episode or whatever it might be, right? Like, if I just push through, someday there'll be 100 episodes, right? And that this is not going to end on episode 1. My first day after baptism. Oh, ouch.
Yeah.
So,
not only is there a parallel from Christ forward to us in time, there's also a parallel back in time to the Old Testament.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have several passages we want to look at, and since we're going to be talking about the temptation of Christ, and he quotes a lot of the Old Testament there too. So all from Deuteronomy, but we're going to look first at some parallels from Exodus. And so in Exodus 3, verses 16 through 19 says,
"Go, assemble the elders of Israel, and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him." So that the reason why we went there, right, when we're talking about the temptation, talking about the baptism, is that this is another parallel. We know famously how God brings the Israelites out of Egypt is through the miraculous crossing of the Red Sea, right? They came out of slavery through water and into the wilderness and eventually into the promised land. And we're following a similar route. We come out of slavery to sin through the waters of baptism, and not straight into heaven. Like you might notice, you look around. I'm not in heaven yet, but into a struggle for however many years you're alive after your baptism, and then into the promised land of heaven.
Well, because slavery, I mean, when you listen to that word, you just think negative thoughts. But if you think about what it really is, right, it's being mastered by an outside force. Whether that's in the case of Egypt with the Israelites, it was the power of Pharaoh, as you were just talking about here, and then this scripture reading talked about, and you were under the despotism of another person, and in human trafficking slavery, right? Whether it's sex slavery, where you've got like a pimp and a prostitute, or whether it's the kind of slavery we had back in the 19th century in this country, where you have a master over a slave who doesn't treat them well. You are not free. But the problem is, when you are freed from your slavery, you aren't used to being in charge anymore. So you don't have
there was a dependence there,
Yeah.
Where'd you get food? From the master.
Yeah.
Where'd you get your clothes, your shelter,
Yeah.
water, everything from the master?
So suddenly you've got to provide for yourself, and you have to learn the skills in some cases, to just be able to make the decisions you have to make every day, because now they're yours to make.
And so that's why they're brought into the wilderness, right? Obviously, there's just raw geographic reason, but as we kind of graft that symbolically onto what's happening with Jesus, what happens in the Christian life, you're brought out of slavery into the wilderness because it's hard. It's a hard road from having everything handed to you, including like your task as a slave, to having to sort of figure it out and take responsibility. It's a hard road and it's a learning process. Um, but you learn rather than dependence on some sort of harsh slave master, you learn dependence on God.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was something I learned in my graduate class on Book of Matthew, that the professor told us there, Dr. Mark Black, was that the wilderness is where you learn dependence on God, and dependence on God is the same thing as closeness with God. So,
Yeah. So we have all those parallels in that passage right at the end too. An interesting line there, which I wanted to include in verse 19, where God says, "But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him." That reminded me of when Jesus talks about, a strong man, having a stronger man breaking into his home and binding him and taking his
hmm
things. When the Pharisees accuse him of only being able to cast out demons because he's working for them, and
yeah, yeah,
you can find this in Mark 3, Matthew 12, or Luke 11 in the Synoptic Gospels. And it just reminded me of that, right? Like Pharaoh wasn't just going to let them go, and Satan doesn't just want to let Christ have us. He would rather have us in the domain of sin, right? But we'll see. Jesus is about to strong arm Satan out in the wilderness. So I thought it was relevant to mention that.
yeah. Well, yeah. So Satan's going to feel the power of God. Pharaoh felt the power of God. He felt the closeness of God, too, in the wilderness, just not in the
Yeah,
recommended way
as the
of warming.
waters were flooding back on his head.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, so now that leads us into this story. So in Luke 4, we're going to look at Luke's account, Luke 4, 1 through 4.
Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, left the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone."
To which Matthew adds in his account in Matthew 4, 4, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God, which is the rest of the sentence in
Yeah, he's
Deuteronomy.
quoting both of those sentences. Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God is a quote, which we'll look at in a minute. Um, yeah, so now we're getting more details than Mark gave us.
A little bit, yeah.
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 Obviously, you don't eat anything for 40 days, and the understatement of all time is he was hungry. Like,
Yeah.
and we thought it was interesting to know as we're recording this, it's during Lent, where for a lot of Christians, 40 days before Easter, they fast in some manner, and those 40 days are inspired by this story.
Yeah, I was inspired by this story because I've been writing a book on the parables, and um, which I hope to finish up someday. But one of the things when I was looking through the Gospels, I was like, "What is the very first parabolic statement that Jesus ever made?" So I started at the beginning of each and read until I got to the first what I considered a parabolic statement, which parable is two things set side by side, and in a
Think of like parallel.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I got to Matthew's account here, and he quotes Deuteronomy 8:3, and that sentence, "Man shall not live on bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." I thought, oh, hey, that's a parable, because if you're comparing two things, living on food or living on the words that come from God. And I never really liked this story. This temptation bothers me because, or I always used to, because it didn't seem realistic to me. Like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like,
Eat pages out of the Bible.
yeah, like don't eat for 40 days. I didn't understand how is that. How am I supposed to do that? I don't know how to do that. Like, that seems impossible, right?
Yeah, I mean, Mark
It's
told us the angels were helping him, and Matthew and Luke will say that eventually. Like, there's
mhm.
some sort of miraculous event making this possible for Jesus to do.
Yeah, Biblicus medically does not recommend not eating anything for 40 days,
Yeah,
right? God can make that decision for himself and for whoever he wants, but we don't recommend it. So don't try that at home. But the interesting thing about this was, as I pondered it, okay, if I'm looking at this parable and I'm rewriting the parable in a modern way, like how could I rewrite this parable that it made sense in a modern mind, maybe with new technologies that they didn't have then, so on. And I thought of a computer. And so I wrote the parable of the computer, which is a computer does not work on power alone, but on every instruction entered by the hand of the programmer. And so the idea there is that if you had a computer and every time you turned it on, it was a Windows computer or whatever, and it goes to blue screen of death,
yeah, yeah.
right? And every time, and you can't make it stop, what are you going to do?
Throw it out.
You're going to stop turning it on, right?
Yeah. So the parable isn't saying don't plug in your computers. It's saying don't get a computer that's not worth plugging in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if it doesn't do anything, if it doesn't have good instructions, it's not worth the power to operate it, right?
Mhm.
And I think exactly what Jesus was saying here to Satan was, Satan said, "Hey, how about you run this program? Turn that stone into bread." And Jesus is like, "Because that's a terrible program.
Mhm.
It's like not what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm out here in the wilderness waiting for God to give me a word as to what he would like for me to do, to give me a program to run. And once I have that program, then I'll eat because then I'll have something worth running that needs power."
Keep in mind this is before his public ministry, or it's the
Yeah.
beginning of his public ministry. Mark has no like birth story or genealogy. He
Mhm.
starts with the baptism of Jesus and the temptation of Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When he leaves the wilderness to start his ministry, then they say, "Why don't you ever fast?" He's like, I'm here doing the work. I'm doing the ministry
I got
now.
it all out of the way. That's kind of genius. It's like I'll eat all healthy for the beginning of the year, so I can just eat junk food the rest of the year.
Well, I mean, he's saying I have a program now that's worth running, and I want to power it with my food now. I
Yeah.
want to eat. I want to keep myself powered because I got this program I'm running, and so it's the same thing with anybody. Now, the very same week I wrote that parable, I was teaching a class on the parables and the parable of the computer, and we talked about it. It was the week of the Uvalde shooting.
Mm.
When I went to teach class, that happened during that week. And it was interesting to think about, okay, here was a kid in the Uvalde shooting. He went to the school, I think he was 18 years old, and he shot like 17 children or something like that, and teachers as well, whatever the number was. And I thought to myself, here is somebody fed this kid 3 square meals a day for 18 years, and he didn't have any better program to run than that.
Hmm.
Like, what? Why feed somebody if you're not going to give them a program worth running, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what Jesus was saying in this parable, or in this temptation here. He was telling Satan, "You know what? I'll decide what program I run and how I power it."
Which isn't a suggestion not to feed the kid. It's
Right?
to
It's a
feed him
teaching. It's
feed him what's needful, what's
yeah.
actually the most important thing.
Hmm.
It reminds me of I told you about this before, but we didn't put it in the notes. Um, there's a pastor Todd Wilkin who I listen to some. He likes to say, if parents, if you baptize your kids but don't prepare them, what you're doing is setting them up with Satan as their enemy,
Hmm.
and with no preparation.
Yeah,
Like
because they go right into the
they have
wilderness.
Jesus as their
Mhm.
ally, but you haven't taught them anything about him. So you just it's a lot. It's very similar to that. It's
Mhm.
it's like let's set the computer running and then put no antivirus software,
Yeah, right.
so
Yeah,
it'll just
yeah.
crash in a week.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Well, and so here's Jesus. Even the things he quotes from the Old Testament are parables.
Hmm.
But Jesus is a prophet, right? So what as we've taught on Biblocus, what should we expect Jesus to do?
To call us back to the law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he quotes the Old Testament, right? That's his shtick as a prophet. And
Yeah. So those words come out of Deuteronomy chapter 8 in the first 5 verses.
it says, "Be careful to follow every command I am giving you today, so that you may live and increase and may enter and possess the land the Lord promised on oath to your ancestors. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothes did not wear out, and your feet did not swell during these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you."
I feel like that's a very hard passage to read. It's it's like God is doing this. He's humbling you. He's making you hungry. He's making you suffer,
Mm-hmm.
and he's disciplining you. It feels a little harsh. But again, here's that same parallel being brought up between the 40 days and the 40 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
In both cases, there's a food shortage, right? And in the Old Testament, God provided with the manna. And so, what is Satan asking Jesus to do by turning the stones into bread?
To feed himself.
To not depend on God, which
Mm-hmm.
what did we say earlier about the wilderness?
Yeah, it's where you learn dependence on God.
Yeah. So he's asking him to shortcut it, not to rely on God's providence, but take matters into his own hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And in fact, Jesus is both the bread and the word. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We see in this is like in John 6 where he tells them that he is the bread that came down from heaven. And
Right.
of course, like the first thing that John starts his gospel with is calling him the word. So he's both the bread and the word that you have to feed on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the irony of telling that person, that this isn't true is astounding.
Well, I think we'll see that in most, all three of the temptations that Satan is, not exactly telling the truth.
Well, it's kind of like we've talked about this a lot recently. The king of I always forget the nation. Aram, the king of Aram,
Oh,
with
yeah, with
Elisha. They're like, there's
Elisha.
this prophet who knows everything you plan. He's like, then let's make a plan to kill him. It's like, how will this guy possibly overcome my brilliant strategy?
Yeah, yeah. Funny. All right, so if you read the closely here, you'll see what the answer to this question: why did God cause their hunger and then provide the manna?
He says explicitly to teach them.
Yeah, yeah. He said that in verse 3, right? The very verse that Jesus quotes. And so that reinforces the whole idea of the parable of the computer, right? Because God's saying, I'm doing all this to teach you, to make sure you have a program that's worth running.
Well, and why does he do it, right? Like, look at the very end, the last verse, right? As a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Well, who is Jesus? We
Yeah.
pointed out the context of the temptation, the beginning of the temptation story. What just happened? God said, "This is my son, who I love, and I'm well pleased with him."
Mm-hmm.
And then he's
Yeah.
like, "All right, son, out in the wilderness for your discipline."
Yeah. Well, let's keep reading this in Matthew 4, verses 5 through 11.
Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down. For it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, Do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, Worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. So we
So,
read from Luke earlier, and then we switched to Matthew here because
mhm.
the accounts are almost identical. We didn't want to just read them twice.
Yeah, but Matthew has them in a different order
They
than,
do,
than Luke. And
they do
so,
in fact flip the
yeah.
order. It's not important, really. It's
Mhm.
probably Matthew seems to be ratcheting up the stakes each time. Like and with the last temptation, the whole world is at stake, and worshiping Satan is the solution.
Hmm.
Whereas Luke he might flip the order because he progresses it towards the temple. They start
Yeah.
they're out in the wilderness, and he ends with the temple.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's a possible reason why. Note what Satan does here is he quotes God's word. It is written, he'll command his angels concerning you. This is the same thing he does in Eden, right? Where he comes to Eve, and it's like, did God say not to eat from the trees of the garden?
No, he told us we could eat from any tree. Oh, except for one.
Yeah. So he's misquoting it.
Hmm.
He's misusing it, right? Trying to twist God's word. He's a dealer of half truths, right?
Hmm.
Nobody believes 100% falsehood.
Right. I like so I'm glad you brought up Eden because D.A. Carson, in his commentary on Matthew, he talks about how Luke inserts the genealogy between the baptism and the temptation.
Hmm.
So we had said earlier that it goes straight from the baptism to the
Yeah,
temptation.
I was mistaken about Luke.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, well, Luke inserts the genealogy there that we studied a few weeks ago, and it's interesting because that ends, with the son of Adam, the son of God,
Hmm.
and so uh, Luke's genealogy is unique in that it goes all the way back to Adam, going backwards, and so he's trying to show here too with this juxtaposition of Jesus and Adam that Adam, even though he was in the idyllic, perfect setting in this garden, and he had one thing,
Yeah,
he
he
had
could eat. He could eat almost everything he wanted.
one temptation, yeah, and he couldn't do it. But Jesus is out in the desert wasteland, starving to death,
Hmm.
and he's facing food temptation, and he triumphs in the worst possible circumstances.
Yeah,
So,
that is a good point.
yeah,
Yeah,
pretty cool.
we did skip the genealogy to not read it again.
Yeah. So, but then Jesus, he's still quoting scripture, right? Even on these next two, we just did the last two temptations in that last reading. He goes back to Deuteronomy again, right?
Yeah, not just any part of Deuteronomy. The basically the official Biblocus chapter of the Bible,
Yeah.
Deuteronomy 6.
Where the Shema resides.
Yeah, he goes a little bit after what you might properly consider the Shema, um, but it's close enough. He probably was a Biblocus subscriber.
Oh, yeah. Well, we gave him an honorary subscription. I don't charge him, but okay. Actually, I don't charge anybody. Just remembered. Okay. So Deuteronomy 6:13-16 says, "Fear the Lord your God, serve him only, and take your oaths in his name. Do not follow other gods, the gods of the peoples around you, for the Lord your God, who is among you, is a jealous God, and his anger will burn against you, and he will destroy you from the face of the land. Do not put the Lord your God to the test, as you did at Massa." So,
Yeah, so you might be asking what masa is. It's probably not the most famous word from the Bible.
right, yeah, it actually means testing,
Hmm.
and it's from Exodus 17 verses 1-7. So let's read that.
The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Go out in front of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massa and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?"
So there's the root of Massa and why it's being quoted in the other passage.
Yeah, Massa means testing, and Meribah means quarreling. The place so nice they named it twice.
So even though they've just recently come out of across the Red Sea to come out of Egypt,
Yeah,
you know,
this is actually the second time they've
kind of
done this.
kind of the nation of Israel is kind of their baptism, right?
They
Through
already did this in Exodus 15. It's literally the first thing that happens when they come out is they're thirsty and they start complaining.
yeah,
So you would think like maybe the first time makes sense. Like, okay, what are we doing out here in the desert?
hmm
God solved it for them there, and then they do it again 2 chapters later,
yeah,
which is also it's one of those things it's a disappointing pattern, right? That especially we see it in the Old Testament, but it would be equally obvious in our own lives if we could pay attention, take the log out of our eyes.
right,
But the pattern of human weakness and failing to trust God over and over again in the Old Testament, you see it in Exodus, where every other chapter they're complaining about something after he's done a million miracles and saved them from Egypt. And we've talked about it in Judges, how Judges sets up this
yeah,
pattern of
hmm
these these judges who just can't be the leader Israel needs.
yeah,
We'll see it in Kings when basically every king is horrible.
for the most part, yeah, yeah. So it's I mean, just take out a mirror and look in it.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean, so
we're
it's
all that way, right?
disappointing, but in another one of those things where it's in a way it's encouraging because it's like, okay, I got baptized and I'm still messed up, and I guess everybody else is still imperfect too.
Yeah. Well, it's like we talked about before. You find this freedom, right? In the case of our our situation, we find freedom from sin. But now that we're free to do good things, we have to choose to do good things.
Yeah,
We have to provide that every day.
by nature being free, you
Yeah,
could also choose not to do good things.
right. And they have to make the same choice when they come out into the wilderness, but they have to provide for themselves everything now because Pharaoh isn't going to provide them any food or whatever else. So, but they decided it was better to eat as a slave, right, than to provide for yourself as a free man or starve as a free man in their case.
Hmm.
But you wanted to share one of your favorite stories about that.
Yeah, as the official Biblocus historian, or in this case, Russian literature expert, I'll just claim all the titles. Put them all on my
Well,
resume.
those two, you definitely wouldn't have to do much to be smarter than me. So go for it.
So there's a story which I've talked about it on the podcast before. And I'll just kind of summarize it. But from the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, there's this story within the story where one of the characters makes up this kind of fable where a grand inquisitor of the Spanish Inquisition has encountered Jesus preaching and healing in the streets, and he imprisons him and takes him in and scolds him, and he's like, "You can't come back and do all this," and he lets him have it, and his reasoning is that Jesus, his standards are too high. He wants people to be free, right? But that's hard. And he's like, "Well, we care about everyone, even those who are too weak to handle their own freedom and responsibility." And he goes to the temptation as his proof text, and he says, basically, he says Satan had it right. All of his temptations weren't temptations; they were solutions. And you should have taken his advice. If you'd made bread from stones, everyone would have followed you like a lost dog because you're feeding them. And and he says with the throwing yourself from the temple, the wonder of it, it would have been incontrovertible evidence, and he's scolding him for wanting people to be free because it's too hard, and he's like, we've made it easy because they come and they willingly give their freedom over to us, and we give them a bunch of things to do, and they like that better, and they um and the final answer, right, is that and again, this is a story within the story, but the final answer that Christ has to the man is he doesn't say anything the whole time, just like when he's on trial with the Pharisees. He just gets up and kisses the man and then walks out. And the guy's dumbfounded and he can't do anything to stop him. And he's like, I didn't consider the fact that you don't want slaves. Maybe you love us and you would like us to love you in return. He doesn't say that. It's left for you to infer. It silences his whole argument. But the quote I lifted here from the beginning of the argument, he says, "For never was there anything more unbearable to the human race than personal freedom." And that's his point, is that the temptations were a chance to betray free will and in particular, the freedom to choose to suffer, which is something that we need probably to understand in this country. We're an affluent country. We're just, you know, more people are fat than starving, and we have every comfort that we want. But look at what happens to Jesus and what is supposed to happen to the Christian as soon as you are baptized and God claims you as His son. You're going to
Hmm.
be tested.
Yeah.
There's going to be difficulty,
Right.
and He's giving Jesus a way out of the difficulty, a way out of the suffering. So I mean, if we take the bread example, right? This actually happens. This actually happens in the gospel, right? Jesus feeds the 5,000 or the 4,000. There's multiple accounts
Yeah.
of feeding thousands of people,
He has to
and
he has to run away because they want to make him king.
yeah, and
Yes.
and then they follow him around the lake, right? And they're on the other side, and he tells them to go away. He's like, "You're not here for me. You're here for the bread. You
Hmm.
don't get it."
Hmm.
So, like the argument was actually pretty much right. It predicted what exactly what would happen. Um, and then the ultimate problem, the ultimate temptation, the one that Matthew builds up to in his ordering, is bending the knee to Satan, taking the easy way out. Satan says, "I'll give you the kingdoms of the world." Right. One of the titles that the Bible has for Satan is the prince of this world. Like it's pretty much told that he kind of has freedom to meddle with affairs and to tempt humans and cause suffering on humans, like what he does to Job.
Hmm.
God holds the reins. It has to be under His providence, but Satan's called the prince of this world, and he's telling Jesus, "You know what? I'll renounce that if you just bend the knee to me. You don't have to go to the cross. You don't have to suffer for these fools. I'll let you have them if that's what you want. But you gotta acknowledge me as as the man who's letting you do that. I'm the liege
Hmm.
lord,
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy.
and we're gonna face similar temptations to forego suffering. Like Jesus tells us, take up our cross. But we're gonna face similar choices to take the easy way out or to follow Christ.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like if you look at the last two temptations, they both kind of line up with the same mistake that David made,
Mm.
right? When he counted the fighting men.
Yeah, we have a whole episode on that.
Yeah, we have an episode on that, and I'll link to it or put a recommendation to it on the page here. But yeah, in that case, David, he wanted to know, how strong am I, right? And basically by counting the fighting men, it's like, how many men can I afford to lose? How many other men's lives
Hmm.
do I have at my disposal to save myself,
Hmm.
basically? And Jesus is looking at it the opposite way of like, if I give up my life, how many men can I save?
Yeah.
And David has it backwards, and he has to repent of that because he's willing to throw away people's lives to win a battle, but when they start dying from the pestilence that comes as a punishment, he's asking God, please stop, stop the death. Don't let any more people die. And it's like, well, you wanted them to die a minute ago if they were defending you.
Hmm.
You know, but so it.
And you'll see if you go watch that episode, the Old Testament series episode about this, David buys a particular hill
Mhm.
to
Yep.
where the angel is standing, smiting the people of Jerusalem, and then it stops, and that hill becomes the Temple Mount where the temple's
Yeah,
built, which
the
is where
threshing floor of Arana.
Satan takes Jesus to tempt him to throw himself off.
Yeah,
So it's
so
like
Jesus is like, well, I've been here before.
it's
It
another one
was.
of those ironic moments where he's like his master plan is just unraveling before his eyes.
Yeah. It's like, I know why I was here before is because of David's ambitions, and they weren't just. And so I'm not going to fall into the same
Hmm.
trap right here at the same spot where I had to command an angel to kill thousands of people in Jerusalem.
Hmm. Well, the point here is summed up really well for us in Hebrews 4, verses 14 through 17. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need.
Yeah, so Jesus, as we've been talking about in this whole series, the incarnation It means that Jesus came as a normal man, like a man with all the same fleshly limitations that we have,
Mhm.
but he lived within them in a way that honors God, which is something we don't do.
Yeah. And the conclusion there, the last verse is so helpful, like in a pastoral sense, so comforting. Let us approach God's throne with confidence that we may receive mercy and grace to help us in our time of need. Like, because the devil does this. Like when you're tempted with a certain sin, whatever, and everybody has their vices. Everybody knows the particular thing or things that they really struggle with. When you're tempted to do whatever, the thought is like, "Oh, it's not that big a deal, really. Like, what is one drink? What is like? You just lost your temper for a second. It's fine, whatever the case may be. No one's gonna know. As soon as you do it, suddenly the script flips, and this is huge. You are such a screw up. You can't go to God. He doesn't want you. Look at you.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, which is it? Is it not a big deal or is it a huge deal? And
Mhm.
so the point is, like, he understands the struggle of that because he's been there. Now he didn't give into it, which is why he's the one to go to. But he's been there. Just like last week, our takeaway was that Jesus is in the waters of baptism. Like when we
Mhm.
go and get baptized, he's there waiting for us. When we come out, just like we said at the start of this episode, right? God looks on us as he looked on Christ and says, "This is my son."
Well, the whole theme we were talking about, how living in the wilderness helps you build your dependence on God, right? What is more demonstrable of your dependence on God than that you have all your confidence that He's going to take care of you, and if you approach Him. And we this was the topic of our episode on the Book of Esther. Remember, we said confidence before the throne. She needed to realize that she could walk straight into the king's chambers, and that he not only would he not kill her, right, as she was afraid, but he would be so glad to see her that he would be like, up to half of my kingdom, whatever it is you came
Yeah,
in here for, right? And when you say that to somebody, when you say up to half my kingdom, what you're really saying to them is, we're equal partners in this, right? Like, hey, half of what I have is yours. Like, we're equal. We're equal halves in this, right? And Jesus, by coming in the incarnation, was saying the same thing to us. Like, God was saying, "Look, I'm in this with you. Here I am." Right? We're both players in this crazy, humanity here, and I'm going to show you like what I would do if I were here, because here I am.
yeah, and so the point is, just as we find him in the waters, we actually find him when we are in the midst of temptation, right? Like he's been through that as well,
Hmm.
and that's why it says he can empathize with our weakness.
So Jesus had a lot to say about temptation, both as he faced it himself, and then for us as we serve him in this world. And that leads us to our words of life takeaway for this week, which comes from Matthew 26, verse 41.
Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation.
So this was when Jesus was in the garden with his disciples, and he was praying, trying to get ready to be arrested and go through the whole passion. And so he's telling his disciples, and you have to listen carefully. He's not saying, pray that you won't fall into temptation.
Mhm.
He's saying, pray so that you will not fall into temptation. So,
He's saying there will be temptation, but if you pray, that's going to be the way out of it.
yeah, praying is like, the safety, the protection from falling to temptation. So,
Yeah, and
interesting that,
I just noticed that that's where one of my favorite hymns these days is "Rise My Soul to Watch and Pray." That's obviously where they got it. I just never put that together. For some reason, having it read now made it click. That's a great hymn for like morning devotional. If you get up in the morning and do your devotional, then
yeah. So, a lot of times we have some recommendation for you at the end. And so our recommendation is pray, and pray that you won't fall to temptation.
mhm.
Pray so that you will not fall to temptation. I even said it wrong. So, but
Yeah. Well, that is one of our temptations is like, I just don't want it to be difficult. I want to not have to be tempted in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, he's Caleb and I'm Timothy, and thank you for listening to Bible Discussions on Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. Please consider subscribing to our channel to help support our efforts. All scripture quotations, unless otherwise indicated, are taken from the Holy Bible, New International Version, NIV, copyright by Biblica Inc., used by permission of Zondervan, all rights reserved. Biblocus is a registered trademark. This program is copyright 2026 by Timothy Klingerman. God bless all of you.